Hey guys, tonight we step into a winter that does not care about you. You probably won't survive this, not in the modern dramatic sense, but in the quiet teeth-chattering way that medieval cold worked its way into bones and refused to leave. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are poor, medieval, and winter has arrived early. Not the cosy postcard version with snow gently falling on cottages, but a hard, biting cold that seeps through stone, wood, and skin. The sun disappears early, the nights stretch long, and warmth becomes something you chase rather than expect. You don't turn in for the night so much as retreat from the cold, hoping sleep will blur the discomfort. Your home barely qualifies as a barrier between you and the outside world. The walls are thin, often packed with mud or wattle, and they hold cold the way modern freezers hold ice. Stone houses, if you're unlucky enough to live in one, are even worse. Stone absorbs the chill during the day and radiates it back at you all night. A historical fact that often surprises people is that medieval stone buildings were frequently colder than wooden ones in winter, despite looking more solid and impressive. You step inside and immediately notice the smell. Smoke, damp earth, animals, unwashed bodies, and old straw all blend into a scent that never fully leaves your clothes. This smell matters because it tells you something important. Heat here is fragile. Every bit of warmth comes from living things or burning things, and both are in short supply. There is no central heating, obviously, but there is also no real insulation. No sealed windows, no weather stripping. Gaps in the walls are stuffed with rags when someone remembers. Wind slides in like an uninvited guest and refuses to leave. You feel it at ankle level first, then creeping upward. Nightfall means the fire becomes the centre of your universe. The hearth isn't decorative, it's survival. But even that fire is unreliable. Fuel is precious. Wood takes time to gather, dries poorly in wet winters, and burns faster than you'd like. Peat might help if you're lucky enough to live near bogs, but it smokes badly and stings the eyes. Here's the quirky part. Many medieval homes didn't have chimneys at all. Smoke simply drifted upward and escaped through holes in the roof, or lingered until it found its way out. You cough, your eyes water, and your clothes absorb the scent permanently. Some historians believe this smoky environment may have reduced insects and bacteria, while others argue it caused chronic lung problems. The debate is ongoing, and you're too cold to care either way. You sit, close to the fire, not because it's comfortable, but because it's the only place where your fingers stop aching. The back of you freezes while the front warms, and you constantly rotate like meat on a spit. When the fire dies down, dread settles in. Night is coming, and sleep means surrendering control over your warmth. You don't go to bed early because you're tired. You go because staying awake without firelight is pointless. Candles are expensive, oil lamps are worse. Darkness presses in fast, and with it cold. Your bed, if you can call it that, is waiting. It's not a separate room. It's not even raised most of the time. A wooden frame if you're lucky, a pile of straw on the floor if you're not. The straw shifts beneath you, poking through thin fabric, already damp from the moisture in the air. Straw beds were often changed only once or twice a year, usually in spring, which means whatever has moved in since autumn is settling down with you. This is where the scholarly debate creeps in quietly. Were medieval peasants more tolerant of cold than we are today, or were they simply enduring constant discomfort we would find unbearable? Some historians argue lifelong exposure built resilience. Others suggest chronic cold stress weakened immune systems and shortened lives. You feel that argument in your joints, aching even before sleep arrives. You keep your clothes on. All of them. Wool tunic, hose, maybe a cap pulled low over your ears. Wool is your best friend. It's itchy, heavy, and smells faintly of sheep, but it keeps heat even when damp. That's another historical fact. Wool's insulating properties made it the most valuable fabric for surviving medieval winters, far more important than linen or leather. As you lie down, you listen. The wind pushes against the walls, the animals shift nearby if they share the building with you. A cow's slow breathing, a pig's grunt. Oddly comforting sounds because living bodies mean warmth. You'll understand later just how intentional that arrangement often was. Sleep doesn't come easily. Cold has a way of keeping you alert, every draught a reminder that comfort is temporary. You curl inward, conserving heat, breath fogging faintly in the darkness. Your world shrinks to the space beneath a rough blanket, and the hope that morning will come quickly. And yet, as your breathing slows, something strange happens. You adapt. Not because it's pleasant, but because you must. This is winter, medieval style. No escape, no pause button, just endurance. Your eyes close, the fire's memory fades, and you drift toward a kind of rest that is never fully warm, never fully safe, but just enough to survive until dawn. You wake without warmth, because warmth never really arrived. Morning doesn't announce itself with light so much as with movement. Someone shifting, an animal snorting, a draft sneaking in where it wasn't before. Your body feels stiff like it spent the night, bracing rather than resting. This is normal. You don't stretch luxuriously, you unfold cautiously, joints protesting the cold air they're exposed to again. Your home comes into focus as your eyes adjust. It isn't a house in the way you might imagine one today. It's a structure designed to keep you alive, not comfortable. Survival architecture. Low ceilings trap what little heat rises. Thick beams hold up a roof that leaks smoke and occasionally rain. The floor is hard-packed earth, cold as stone and permanently damp in winter months. Here's a solid historical fact. Most medieval peasants in northern Europe lived in longhouses or single-room dwellings, where people, animals, tools and food all shared the same space. Separate rooms were a luxury and privacy was nearly non-existent. But this design wasn't laziness, it was thermal strategy. Every warm body mattered. You notice how close everything is. The cow isn't far from where you slept. Chickens roost overhead. A pig might be penned just beyond a low wooden barrier. Their heat rises slowly, subtly, but constantly. At night, this shared warmth can mean the difference between misery and frostbite. You don't think of it as unsanitary. You think of it as necessary. Some historians argue that these mixed-use homes were more energy efficient than later, more refined medieval houses. Others counter that disease risk outweighed the benefits. The scholarly debate lingers, but standing here you feel the truth in your bones. Without animals, this place would be colder, much colder. The walls themselves are a problem. If they're wattle and daub, woven sticks packed with mud, they crack in winter as moisture freezes and expands. Cold air finds those cracks easily. If they're stone, they sweat with the condensation. Moisture clings to everything, making cold feel sharper, more invasive. Damp cold is worse than dry cold, and medieval winters are famously wet. You move closer to the hearth, hoping there's enough embers left to coax back into flame. Often there isn't. Fires were banked overnight if fuel allowed, but many nights they simply burned out. Rekindling means blowing gently, feeding scraps of wood, praying the spark hasn't died. Your breath clouds the air as you work. Here's a quirky detail that often surprises people. Medieval peasants frequently avoided large fires at night, not just to save fuel, but because of fear. Fire was one of the greatest threats to a poor household. A single stray ember could mean losing everything. So you choose cold over catastrophe again and again. As daylight strengthens, such as it is in winter, you see the structure more clearly. There are no windows with glass. At best, there are shutters. Often, just holes covered with cloth, parchment, or nothing at all. Glass existed, but it was expensive and fragile, reserved for churches and the wealthy. Every opening is a compromise between light and warmth usually loses. You begin to understand that sleeping through winter isn't about creating warmth. It's about slowing heat loss. Everything in your home is designed, consciously or not, to leak heat more slowly. Low doors keep drafts down, narrow spaces limit airflow. Even clutter helps. Tools, baskets, sacks of grain, all act as crude insulation. You sit eating something simple if food allows, bread, maybe a thin porridge, eating matters. There's a medieval belief rooted in humoral theory that digestion produces internal heat. This isn't entirely wrong. Calories are fuel and winter demands more of them. Going to bed hungry in winter is dangerous, not just uncomfortable. There's an old saying from the period that winter eats the poor first. Extreme cold kills through accumulation. Less food, weaker bodies, more illness. Children and the elderly suffer most. This isn't drama, it's math. Smaller bodies lose heat faster. Fragile bodies can't recover as easily. As the night approaches again, you prepare, not by changing the environment much, but by adjusting yourself. You gather extra straw, you pull clothing closer. You plan where to sleep based on wind direction and animal placement. Sleeping is strategic. You don't just lie down anywhere. This is where the idea of medieval hardiness becomes slippery. Were people tougher, or were they simply forced into constant adaptation? You feel the answer in the way you move automatically now, conserving energy, avoiding exposure, thinking 2 steps ahead. It's not bravery, it's practice. As darkness settles, the cold returns with it, steady and patient. You know what's coming, you know the fire won't last, you know the walls won't help. But you also know the rhythm now. You lie down again, closer to the animals, wrapped in wool and habit, ready to endure another night, not because you're strong, but because you have no alternative. By the 3rd night, you stop thinking of sleep as something separate from survival. Sleep is survival, or at least the closest thing to it during winter. You've learned that warmth doesn't come from space, it comes from bodies, and the more bodies you can gather, the better your chances. This is why everyone sleeps together. Not romantically, not comfortably, practically. The entire household collapses into a single sleeping zone once the fire fades. Adults, children, elderly relatives, everyone piles in close. There is no concept of personal space. That idea belongs to warmer centuries. Here, distance is dangerous. Even a hand's width of cold air feels wasteful. You press against someone else's back. Someone's feet are against your calves. A child curls between 2 adults like a warm stone tucked into a coat pocket. Breathing overlaps, blankets overlap, body heat pools, imperfectly but noticeably. You feel it working slowly, like a shared engine idling through the night. This practice has a real historical basis. Medieval records, particularly from manorial accounts and later household manuals, describe shared sleeping arrangements as normal among the poor. Separate beds were rare, separate rooms even rarer, and while later moralists wrung their hands over modesty, winter didn't care about that. Here's the quirky part. People often slept head to foot rather than side by side. Not for intimacy, but efficiency. It allowed more bodies under fewer blankets and reduced heat loss at the edges. It also conveniently reduced direct face-to-face breathing, which some believed helped prevent illness, though germ theory was centuries away. Illness, however, was always on your mind. Cold was blamed for almost everything. Medieval medicine, rooted in the theory of the 4 humours, saw winter as a season of imbalance. Cold and wet conditions were thought to increase phlegm, leading to coughs, lethargy and worse. Letting your body chill too deeply was believed to invite disease inside you, like leaving a door open. There's a long-running scholarly debate here. Did cold itself cause illness, or was it the indirect effects? Malnutrition, damp housing, weakened immunity. Modern historians lean toward the latter, but medieval people experienced it as a direct threat. You don't argue with theories when your teeth won't stop chattering. You notice how everyone sleeps curled inward, knees drawn up, arms tucked tight. This isn't instinct, it's learned behaviour. Curling reduces exposed surface area, conserving heat. People who slept sprawled were said to invite the cold in. Children were corrected for it. Elders modelled the proper posture. The floor beneath you leaches warmth constantly. Even with straw, even with wool, the earth drinks heat without mercy. Raised beds exist, but among the poor they're rare and often shared. A wooden frame with rope supports might lift you slightly off the ground, but the ropes sag and drafts still find you. Here's a historical detail that often gets overlooked. Medieval blankets were small, not the oversized bed comforters you're used to. They barely covered one person, let alone several. That's why overlapping bodies mattered more than overlapping bedding. Blankets were layered, patched, passed down and guarded carefully. And yes, the straw bed is alive. Fleas, lice, mites, tiny winter companions that thrive in warmth and neglect. Cold doesn't kill them. It slows them maybe, but once bodies gather, they wake up. You feel the itch, but don't scratch too much. Breaking skin invites infection. This is another silent calculation you make without thinking. Some historians speculate that the constant exposure to parasites shaped medieval immune systems in ways we barely understand. Others argue the toll was immense and underreported. Either way, you share your sleep with more than just humans. At some point in the night you wake. Not fully, just enough to know you're cold again. This is common. Medieval sleep is often segmented, 2 shorter sleeps separated by a quiet waking period. Sometimes you pray, sometimes you talk softly, sometimes you just shift closer to someone warmer. There's comfort in knowing you're not alone in this. Everyone breathes together. Everyone endures together. The cold doesn't single you out. It presses on the entire group evenly, like a weight shared across many shoulders. Eventually exhaustion wins. Muscles loosen, thoughts blur. The cold recedes just enough to stop demanding your attention. You drift back under, not warm, not comfortable, but held in place by human closeness and routine. This is how you sleep through winter now. Not by defeating the cold, but by diluting it, sharing it, surviving it collectively, one crowded, restless night at a time. At some point you realise the animals aren't just nearby, they're part of the plan. You don't think of it in sentimental terms. This isn't about companionship. It's about heat, survival, and the quiet agreement between human and livestock that winter demands. In many poor medieval households, animals sleep under the same roof as you, sometimes separated by little more than a low wooden rail. Cows, in particular, are prized not just for milk, but for their steady body heat. A single cow can produce as much warmth as several humans combined. This is a documented historical fact noted in later agricultural treatises that reflect long-standing rural practices. You smell them before you feel them. Warm, sour, earthy. Their breath fogs the air in slow clouds. Their bodies radiate a low, constant heat that doesn't flicker like firewood does. At night, when the hearth goes cold, the animals keep working. Here's the part that sounds strange to modern ears. Medieval peasants often positioned sleeping areas downhill from the animals. Heat rises, and even in a single-room dwelling that mattered. The architecture is crude, but the physics is sound. You learn where the warmest spots are through trial, error, and long winters. Of course, animals bring problems. Noise for one. Shifting hooves, the occasional startled movement, the endless chewing. But worse is the waste. Manure accumulates quickly into winter when animals can't be turned out to pasture. You shovel when you can, but frozen ground limits how much you can do. The smell is constant. The risk of disease is real, and yet without them, you would freeze. This is where historians disagree again. Some argue that cohabiting with animals dramatically increased exposure to zoonotic diseases. Others point out that the alternative, sleeping in an unheated, empty structure, was often deadlier in winter. You're not choosing between good and bad, you're choosing between bad and worse. The animals sleep differently than you do. They stand, they lie down briefly, they shift often. Their heat output doesn't stop. Even when they rest, their digestion continues, generating warmth. Ruminants like cows are especially valuable for this reason, a detail medieval farmers didn't know scientifically, but understood practically. You curl up closer using a wooden barrier as both boundary and heat trap. It blocks drafts at floor level and catches some of the warmth drifting off animal bodies. Everything here has multiple purposes. Nothing is decorative. The open hearth, if it's still warm at all, sits between human and animal space. It's a fragile heart in the middle of the room. Some nights you keep it alive longer by feeding it dung. Yes, dried animal dung burns. Poorly, smokily, but it burns. That's the quirky fact people rarely associate with medieval Europe, though it was common in fuel-poor regions. Smoke fills the space, stinging your eyes, coats your lungs, but smoke also drives away insects and preserves the wooden beams overhead. There's debate among scholars about whether smoke-blackened interiors helped reduce parasites or simply masked their presence. You don't care. Smoke means heat, even briefly. You think about the risk of fire constantly. Straw, dry wood, wool, all of it burns fast. That fear shapes how you sleep. You never fully relax. Part of you listens for crackling that's too loud, too fast. Fire is warmth, but it's also disaster. Children are taught early to respect this balance. Don't play near the hearth, don't kick embers, don't pull straw too close. Winter nights are when mistakes are least forgivable. There's no fire brigade, no insurance. If the house goes, so do your chances. As you settle in again, you feel the subtle difference animal heat makes. Not cosy, not comfortable, but survivable. Your breath doesn't fog as much. Your toes sting less. Sleep comes a little faster. This arrangement shapes how you think about animals. They are not pets, they're partners in endurance. You care for them because they care for you, in the blunt biological sense of shared warmth and shared shelter. By morning, frost may coat the inside of the walls, ice may form in water buckets, but you wake alive, and in winter, that's the only metric that matters. The fire is never just a fire, it's the centre of your night, your risk, your hope, and your constant compromise. By winter, you've learned not to trust it completely. Fire gives warmth, yes, but it demands attention, fuel, and respect, and it can betray you just as easily as the cold. Your hearth is open, not enclosed. A shallow pit or a stone-lined space set into the floor or wall. There's no iron grate, no controlled airflow. You build the fire carefully, stacking thin sticks first, saving thicker logs for when the cold bites hardest. Every piece of wood has been hauled, split, dried, and rationed. You don't waste it on spectacle. Here's a solid historical fact. In many medieval peasant homes, the hearth burned directly on the floor with no chimney, relying on smoke holes or loose roofing to vent fumes. Chimneys didn't become common in ordinary houses until the late Middle Ages, and even then, mostly among the wealthy. For you, smoke is just part of breathing. You sit close enough to feel your skin tighten from heat on one side, while the other side stays numb. You rotate slowly, warming your front, then your back, or then your hands. This ritual is so ingrained you barely notice doing it. Everyone does. Children learn it before they can read. The smoke stings your eyes and makes them water constantly. Over time, you stop noticing the irritation, though it never truly goes away. Some historians argue that chronic smoke exposure shortened medieval lives. Others suggest it helped preserve food, repel insects, and dry out damp interiors. The scholarly debate continues, but your lungs feel heavy either way. As night deepens, you make a choice. How long to keep the fire alive? Let it burn too long, and you risk running out of fuel before winter ends. Let it die too early, and the cold settles in faster. There's no perfect answer, only habit and guesswork. Many nights you bank the fire, pulling embers together, covering them with ash to slow their burn. This technique can keep coals alive until morning if you're lucky. It's a quiet skill passed down through the observation, not instruction. When it works, you wake to warmth. When it fails, you wake to frost. Firelight shapes your evenings. You don't move much once it's dark. The edges of the room dissolve into the shadow. Stories are told softly. Tools are set aside. Activity slows not because you're tired, but because light and heat are limited resources. Here's a quirky detail. Medieval people often associated fire with morality and order. A well-tended hearth symbolised a well-run household. Letting it go out was seen not just as impractical, but shameful. In some communities, borrowing fire from a neighbour was allowed, but noted. As you prepare to sleep, you pull back from the hearth reluctantly. Distance from fire is distance from safety. You pile straw closer, but not too close. You arrange bedding where heat lingers longest, usually downwind of the embers. These are micro decisions, but they matter. You lie down fully clothed, boots sometimes left on during the coldest nights. Wool socks, patched and repatched, stay on no matter how itchy they get. Your feet are the first thing to go numb, and once they do, sleep becomes impossible. Fire continues to crackle softly, then less so, then not at all. The room cools in stages. You feel each one, the first chill on your cheeks, the deeper cold settling into your chest, the final bone-level cold that tells you the fire is truly gone. Still you sleep, not deeply, not peacefully, but enough. Fire has done what it can. The rest is up to bodies, blankets, animals, and endurance. Tomorrow you'll coax flame from ash again, hoping winter doesn't notice how thin your margins have become. The problem with chimneys is that they don't exist for you, not really, at least not yet. In your world, smoke has nowhere proper to go, and that shapes every winter night you endure. Your roof is the chimney, gaps between thatch, a crude hole near the peak, loose boards that let smoke seep out slowly, reluctantly. On still nights, the smoke lingers, curling back down, filling the room until your eyes sting and your throat tightens. You learn to read the wind instinctively. A breeze from the right direction clears the air. The wrong direction traps it. Here's a historical fact that surprises many people. Purpose-built chimneys were rare in ordinary European homes. until the 14th and 15th centuries, and even then they spread slowly. Before that, smoke management relied on architectural improvisation. Poor households lived in a constant trade-off between warmth and breathable air. You crouch low when the smoke thickens. Everyone does. The air near the floor is cleaner, cooler, but easier to breathe. Children and animals instinctively lower themselves. Over time, soot coats everything above waist height. Beams blacken. Roof timbers harden, preserved by smoke the way meat is preserved in a smokehouse. There's a theory among historians that this constant smoke exposure helped protect wooden structures from rot and insect damage. Another camp argues it caused chronic respiratory illness, eye damage, and early death. Both can be true. Preservation for the house, damage for the people inside it. You don't question it, you adapt. You position your sleeping area carefully, away from where smoke pools worst. You learn that smoke settles differently depending on weather. Damp nights are worse, cold, still nights trap it low, windy nights clear it faster but steal heat through every crack. Here's a quirky medieval belief. Smoke was thought to purify the air. Bad smells meant disease, according to miasma theory, and smoke chased bad smells away. So the sting in your lungs is paradoxically comforting. It means the air is being cleaned. As night stretches on, your eyes burn. Tears streak down your cheeks, not from emotion but irritation. You blink often. Everyone does. This constant watering may have reduced some infections, or it may have just been another layer of misery. No one's writing it down yet. Sleep comes in short bursts. Smoke makes deep sleep difficult. You wake coughing, roll away from the hearth, then inch back when the cold bites harder than the fumes. It's a constant negotiation between freezing and choking. Children learn this balance early. They're taught where to sit, where not to lie down, how to cover their faces with cloth when smoke thickens. Survival skills, disguised as household habits. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether the introduction of chimneys significantly improved health or simply shifted problems. Chimneys drew smoke out, yes, but they also drew heat out faster. Early chimneys were inefficient, and some peasants reportedly disliked them because houses became colder. Warmth versus clean air. Again, no perfect solution. You imagine what it might be like to have a proper chimney someday. Smoke rising cleanly out, fire burning without filling the room. But that dream belongs to wealthier households and future centuries. For now, smoke is the price you pay for not freezing. Eventually, the fire dies low, smoke thins, the room cools. Your lungs get a brief rest just as your skin begins to sting again. You pull cloth over your mouth, not just for warmth, but to filter the air a little. It helps, maybe. As sleep finally deepens, soot drifts down slowly, settling on hair, blankets, straw. By morning, everything will smell of smoke again. It never leaves. Neither does winter. When you finally lie down for good, the bed itself reminds you how little comfort matters here. There is no mattress in the modern sense. What you have is a sack, or just a space, filled with straw, hay, dried leaves, or whatever could be gathered before the ground froze solid. Straw is common, but it's not soft. The stalks bend and crackle under your weight, poking through thin fabric. Hay is better if you can get it, but that's animal food first, bedding second. Leaves work briefly, then crumble. Over the course of winter, everything compresses into a lumpy, uneven mat that smells faintly sweet, then sour, then just old. Here's a straightforward historical fact. Medieval household accounts and later inventories often list straw as bedding for the poor, while feather-filled mattresses were luxury items reserved for elites. Even then, feathers were often mixed with straw to save cost. Comfort was stratified sharply along class lines. You rearrange the straw before lying down, trying to even out the worst hollows. This is a nightly ritual. If you don't do it, you'll wake sore and colder than before. The straw insulates, but only if it traps air. Once. It flattens. The cold from the floor seeps through faster. There's a practical reason straw is replaced so rarely. Winter makes everything harder. Gathering fresh material means exposure. It means time away from work. It means burning calories you can't spare. So you tolerate what you have, even as it degrades. Here's the quirky part. Some medieval people believed sleeping on fresh straw was unhealthy. Too much green matter, they thought, encouraged dampness and illness. Old, dry straw was preferred, even if it was less comfortable. Again, warmth and dryness trump softness. As you settle in, you feel the movement beneath you that isn't your own. Straw shifts. Something scurries. You don't investigate. Disturbing the bed invites bites, and bites invite scratching, and scratching invites infection. Better to stay still and let the night pass. You pull a blanket over yourself. It's heavy, rough, and smells like smoke and sheep. Wool fibres catch and hold air, which is why they work. They itch because they're doing their job. You tuck the blanket tightly around your shoulders, minimising gaps where heat can escape. Another historical detail often overlooked. Medieval blankets were often narrower and shorter than modern ones. Covering your feet means exposing your shoulders, covering your chest leaves your toes vulnerable. You learn to prioritise. Feet numb quickly and recover slowly. You wrap them first. You might have a second covering, an old cloak, a patched tunic layered on top. Layering is essential. Trapped air between layers does more than any single thick piece. This principle isn't written down for you, but you live it. Scholars still debate how much sleep quality suffered under these conditions. Some argue that medieval people adapted and slept deeply despite discomfort. Others suggest chronic sleep deprivation was common, contributing to fatigue and illness. Lying here, half awake, half cold, you suspect the latter. Your bed is shared. Even if the straw is yours, bodies overlap. A shoulder presses into your side, someone's knee digs into your back. You adjust without complaint. Complaining doesn't make anyone warmer. Eventually the straw settles, the noise is quiet. The itch fades into the background. You stop noticing the smell because it's always there. Sleep creeps in, shallow but persistent. This is rest, medieval style. Not comfort, not escape. Just a pause long enough to face the cold again tomorrow. You learn quickly that bedding doesn't just keep heat in, it keeps things in. And some of those things have teeth. The straw beneath you is warm now, warmed by hours of shared body heat. That warmth wakes everything living inside it. Fleas first, then lice, then mites so small you don't feel them until it's too late. Winter doesn't kill them. If anything, it concentrates them, driving them closer to the only reliable heat source in the house, you. Here's an uncomfortable, historical fact. Medieval people were almost universally infested with some form of parasite regardless of class, but the poor suffered most. Bedding, rarely cleaned or replaced, became a long-term habitat for insects. Winter merely changed their behaviour, not their presence. You feel the first itch on your ankle. You resist scratching. Scratching breaks skin, and broken skin invites infection. Medieval medicine understands this, even if it can't explain bacteria. So you rub gently through cloth instead, or press the spot until sensation dulls. Lice are worse because they follow you. They live in clothing seams and hair. You delouse when you can, picking them out by hand or combing with crude tools. Winter makes this harder. Removing clothing exposes skin to cold and water is freezing. Many people simply tolerate lice until spring. Here's the quirky part. Lice were sometimes seen as a sign of health. The belief went that lice preferred warm blood and avoided the sick. If your lice disappeared suddenly, it could be taken as a bad omen. Scholars debate how widespread this belief was, but references appear in medieval texts often enough to raise eyebrows. You shift slightly, careful not to disturb the group too much. Movement creates drafts. Drafts steal heat, so you balance discomforts against warmth, choosing which irritations to endure and which to adjust. The blanket scratches your neck. The straw pokes your ribs. Something bites your calf. You exhale slowly, practicing a kind of medieval mindfulness. Accepting what you cannot change because changing it costs too much energy. Sleep comes in layers, just like your clothing. Light sleep first, then a deeper drift, then waking again when a flea reminds you it exists, and this pattern repeats through the night. No one expects uninterrupted rest. That idea belongs to a future with clean beds and sealed houses. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether parasites significantly weakened medieval populations or whether people adapted immunologically. Some argue constant exposure built resilience. Others note the high rates of skin infections and anemia. Lying here, scratching carefully, you suspect the truth sits uncomfortably in the middle. Children are taught early how to live with this. Don't panic, don't flail, don't tear at yourself. Mothers and elders pass down small tricks, smearing certain fats on skin, wearing tighter garments, sleeping in specific positions. None are perfect. All are attempts. The smoke from the hearth helps a little, fleas dislike it, so does everyone else, but you take what advantages you can. A smoky house is a buggy house, but slightly less so than a clean-smelling one. Eventually, exhaustion dulls sensation. Your body prioritizes warmth and rest over comfort. The itching fades into background noise like wind against the walls. You drift deeper, pulled under by sheer fatigue. This is the hidden cost of medieval winter sleep. Not just cold, but constant irritation. Your rest is never complete, never untouched. And yet morning comes anyway, and you wake, scratch carefully, and do it all again, because winter isn't done with you yet. If there is one material standing between you and winter's worst intentions, it's wool. Not fire, not stone, wool. Scratchy, heavy, and smelling faintly of the animal it's aimed from. Wool is the quiet hero of medieval sleep. You wear it constantly. A wool tunic against your skin, hose on your legs, socks if you have them, and almost certainly a wool cap. You don't undress to sleep. That would be reckless. Clothing isn't daytime gear and nighttime gear. It's insulation, worn until it falls apart. Here's a clear historical fact. Wool was the most widely used textile in medieval Europe, especially among the poor, because it retained warmth even when damp. Linen, by contrast, wickered moisture but provided little insulation. That made wool indispensable for winter. Survival. You feel the weight of it as you lie down. Wool presses in, traps air, slows heat loss. Ooh, yes. It itches because the fibres are coarse, but that irritation is preferable to numbness. You've learned not to fight it. Scratching wastes energy and breaks skin. Layering matters. A tunic over a shirt, a cloak over both. Each layer traps a thin pocket of air, and those pockets add up. This principle isn't explained in theory, it's learned by experience. People who layer poorly don't sleep well. People who don't sleep well don't last long in winter. Here's a quirky detail. Some medieval households slept in their cloaks, not because it was comfortable, but because cloaks were valuable and could double as blankets. Losing one to theft or fire was a serious blow. Keeping it on your body reduced risk and increased warmth. You pull your cap lower over your ears. Heat escapes from the head quickly, and medieval people noticed this long before modern science quantified it. Nightcaps weren't fashion, they were practical. Children without head coverings were scolded in winter. Elders wrapped extra cloth around their temples. There's debate among historians about how effective medieval clothing really was. Some argue the coarseness and poor tailoring limited insulation. Others point out that people adjusted fit with belts, ties and layering, creating surprisingly effective thermal systems. You don't think in those terms. You just know that without wool you'd be in trouble. Your clothing smells of smoke, sweat and lanolin. Washing is rare in winter. Water is cold, drying is difficult. So garments are aired near the hearth instead, smoke acting as both deodorizer and preservative. It's not clean, but it's manageable. You shift slightly, tucking loose fabric beneath you to block drafts. Gaps are dangerous. Even a small opening can bleed warmth fast. You learn to feel where cold seeps in and plug it instinctively, with cloth, straw, or another body. Sleep comes easier when you're properly layered. Not deep, not luxurious, but steadier. The cold still presses in, but it has to work harder now. Wool doesn't defeat winter. It slows it down. As you drift, you think dimly, but how strange it is that something so simple makes the difference. No invention, no mechanism, just sheep, shears, and generations of practice. Medieval life often works like that. Survival built from ordinary materials, refined through long cold experience. Your breathing slows, the itch fades, the wool holds. For now, it's enough. You sleep like an onion. Not gracefully, layered. Every extra piece of fabric is another small barrier between you and the cold, and winter has taught you not to be proud about it. You pile clothing on your body the way you pile straw on the floor, unevenly, imperfectly, but with purpose. You don't change into sleepwear. That idea doesn't exist. What you wear during the day is what you wear at home. Night sometimes with additional layers added as the temperature drops. Tunics stay on, hose stay on, belts are loosened but rarely removed, because tucked fabric seals in warmth better when it's gathered. Here's a historical fact that often goes unnoticed. Medieval clothing was designed to be multifunctional. Garments were layered not just for warmth, but because people owned very few pieces. A poor household might own only one set of winter clothing per person. Taking it off at night would be both pointless and risky. You pull an extra tunic over your chest, even if it makes movement harder. Restricted movement is a fair trade for retained heat. You tuck the hem beneath you, trapping air. You cross your arms tightly, hands tucked into armpits or sleeves. Fingers are fragile in winter. Lose feeling there and everything becomes harder. Hats matter more than you expect. You keep yours on even in bed, even when it slips down over your eyes. A wool cap or hood covers ears, forehead, neck, places where heat escapes quickly. Medieval people didn't know the percentage breakdown of heat loss, but they knew the feeling of waking with an aching head and stiff jaw. Here's a quirky detail. Some medieval illustrations show people sleeping with belts, hats, and even gloves on. This wasn't artistic exaggeration. Gloves were rare among the poor, but when they existed, they were guarded carefully and worn at night during severe cold. Layering also helps with another problem: drafts. Air finds its way in everywhere. Between floorboards, under doors, through shutters, layered clothing acts like a moving draft stopper. Wherever you shift, the insulation shifts with you. There's a scholarly debate about whether sleeping fully clothed increased the risk of dampness and illness. Some argue moisture trapped in clothing could chill the body. Others counter that the alternative, exposed skin, was far worse. Medieval people clearly came down on the side of a stay covered. As you settle, you feel bulky and awkward. Turning over requires effort, but that effort generates heat briefly and you welcome it. You don't toss and turn endlessly, you choose a position and commit to it, conserving energy. Children are wrapped tighter than adults. Extra layers, extra cloth around feet and heads. Elders too. The household quietly prioritizes those least able to generate their own heat. This isn't sentimentality, it's practicality. Losing a child or elder in winter is devastating, emotionally and economically. Eventually the layers stop feeling heavy and start feeling protective. The cold presses in from outside, but it slows as it passes through wool, linen, skin. You breathe steadily, letting your body do what it can. This is medieval comfort. Not softness, but adequacy. Enough layers, enough warmth, enough rest to see another grey winter morning. By now you understand that blankets aren't personal items, they're communal. Tools. A blanket doesn't belong to you so much as it belongs to the group. Passed, shared, tugged, and negotiated silently through the night. When it's time to sleep, the blankets come out last, layered carefully over everyone already arranged beneath. They're heavy, coarse, and never quite large enough. Someone always ends up with cold shoulders or exposed feet. You learn to live with that. Complaints waste breath and don't make fabric grow. Here's a historical fact grounded in household records and wills. Blankets were valuable goods. They were listed individually, repaired repeatedly, and handed down through generations. A poor family might own only 1 or 2 usable blankets total, no matter how many people slept under them. You slide closer to the centre of the group. Edges are dangerous, heat leaks fastest there. The middle is warmest, thick with overlapping bodies and trapped air. Children are tucked inside first, elders next. Able-bodied adults take the outer, positions when necessary, acting as human windbreaks. Breathing becomes synchronized without effort. You hear it. Slow inhales, soft exhales, the occasional cough. Shared breath adds warmth, faint but real. In a sealed space, even respiration matters. This is one reason sleeping alone in winter is risky. Solitary body loses heat too fast. Here's a quirky detail that appears in later medieval commentary. People believed sleeping under the same blanket encouraged harmony. Shared warmth was thought to calm tempers and strengthen family bonds. Modern readers might smile at that, but lying here, you feel how closeness dulls anxiety as much as it dulls cold. Blankets slide during the night. Someone turns, someone kicks, someone pulls too much fabric their way. These movements ripple through the group. You adjust instinctively, retucking edges, pulling cloth back over exposed skin without fully waking. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how these shared sleeping. Arrangements affected disease transmission. Crowding certainly spread illness, but isolation in winter could be fatal. Again, medieval life offers no clean solutions, only trade-offs. You feel someone's back pressed against yours, solid and warm. It's not intimate in the modern sense. It's functional closeness. Skin contact through layers transfers heat efficiently. Wool against skin creates a barrier winter struggles to penetrate. Feet are the hardest problem. They stick out. They lose heat quickly. You cross ankles with someone else sharing warmth. It's an unspoken habit. Children do it without being told. Cold teaches cooperation early. At some point the blanket smells strongly of smoke and bodies. It's not pleasant, but it's familiar. Familiarity is comforting. You associate that smell with nights survived, mornings reached. As sleep deepens, individual discomfort fades. You stop noticing whose elbow is in your ribs or whose knee presses your thigh. The group becomes one warm mass, breathing, shifting, enduring together. This is how blankets work here, not as personal comfort, but as collective defense, against wind, against frost, against the long, patient cold pressing in from every side. You start to understand that your head is the gatekeeper of warmth. Lose heat there, and the rest of your body follows. Medieval people don't measure temperature, but they feel patterns, and this one is obvious. Nights when your head stays warm are nights you sleep better. So you keep your nightcap on. It's not decorative, it's not clean, it's a simple wool cap, felted thick, sometimes patched, sometimes stretched thin from years of use. You pull it low over your ears and forehead, even if it slips over your eyes. You'd rather blink around fabric than wake with a pounding frozen skull. Here's a historical fact supported by artwork and household accounts. Sleeping caps were common across medieval Europe, worn by men, women, and children alike. Among the poor, they were often worn day and night during winter, removed only when absolutely necessary. If you don't have a proper cap, you improvise, a strip of cloth wrapped around your head, a spare sleeve tied in place. Even a folded tunic draped over your hair helps. Hair alone isn't enough, especially when damp from smoke or sweat. You tuck the blanket up around your neck, but not over your face. Breathing into fabric makes it damp, and dampness steals heat faster than cold air. This is something you've learnt the hard way. Wet cloth against skin in winter is dangerous. Better cold air than wet insulation. Here's a quirky medieval belief. Cold entering through the head was thought to cloud the mind and invite melancholy. Winter sadness was explained as physical chill settling in the brain. Scholars debate how metaphorical this was, but medieval texts often warn against letting the head go uncovered. You sleep with your chin tucked down, protecting your throat. Scarves are rare among the poor, but necks are vulnerable. You angle your body so your face is shielded from drafts. Even a slight turn of the head can mean the difference between rest and shivering. Children are watched closely for this. If a child's cap slips off in the night, someone notices and fixes it. Not always immediately, but eventually. A cold head and a small body can spiral quickly. Elders too. Their circulation weaker, their warmth harder to maintain. There's debate among historians about how much medieval people understood thermoregulation versus how much was instinct and tradition. But lying here, cap pulled tight, you don't need theory. You feel the difference immediately. Your ears ache less, your jaw relaxes, the tension in your temples eases. Sleep settles deeper, smoother, less interrupted by cold shocks. As the night stretches on, frost may creep along the walls, ice may form in the water bucket, but under wool, under layers, under shared breath and shared blankets, your head stays warm enough to let the rest of you follow. This is how small details matter in winter. A cap, a fold of cloth, a habit passed down without explanation, only results. You drift deeper now, carried not by comfort, but by competence, the quiet knowledge of how to survive another freezing medieval night. The cold doesn't rush in all at once. It sneaks, it slides along the floor, seeps through cracks, and settles where you least expect it. By now, you know the enemy isn't just low temperature, it's moving air. Drafts are what steal heat fastest, and winter teaches you to hunt them down like pests. Your door is a problem. It never quite fits its frame. Wood warps with moisture, shrinks in cold, swells again when it thaws. Gaps open along the edges, especially at the bottom, right where cold air hugs the ground. At night, you stuff those gaps with whatever you have. Rags, old clothing, even loose straw tied in bundles. Here's a historical fact drawn from household accounts and archaeological evidence. Medieval homes often used textiles as insulation, hanging cloths or tapestries not for decoration, but to block drafts. Among the poor, these were crude and practical patched fabric sacks, or worn-out garments pressed into service. You feel along the walls with your hand, slowly, sensing where the cold breathes in. Your fingers tingle when you find it. That's where you wedge something, anything. A board leaned at an angle, a basket pushed tight. Even furniture becomes insulation. Nothing in the room is where it belongs. It's where it helps most. Windows are worse, if you can call them windows. Most are just openings with wooden shutters. Some have cloth stretched across them. Parchment, if you're lucky. Glass is a fantasy. At night, shutters are closed, but they never seal fully. Wind rattles them softly, a constant reminder of what's waiting outside. Here's a quirky detail. People sometimes smeared animal fat or wax into cracks around doors and shutters. It helped a little, sealing gaps and repelling moisture. It also smelled terrible. But in winter, effectiveness beats elegance every time. You sleep positioned away from the worst drafts. Beds aren't placed for symmetry, they're placed for airflow. You learn which corner stays warmest depending on wind direction. On stormy nights, you rearrange sleeping spots entirely, dragging straw and blankets across the floor like a slow, tired chess game against the weather. There's a scholarly debate about whether medieval homes were deliberately designed to minimize drafts, or whether people simply adapted after the fact. Some argue vernacular architecture shows clear understanding of airflow. Others say necessity forced constant improvisation. From where you lie, the distinction doesn't matter. Either way, survival depends on plugging holes. You also block drafts with your own body. Curling tightly, turning your back to the windward wall, pressing against others. Even breathing creates a tiny warm pocket in front of your face, disrupted instantly if a draft cuts through it. Children learn this instinctively. They gravitate toward corners that feel warmer. They burrow under loth. Elders show them where to sleep on the coldest nights. Knowledge passes quietly, without explanation, reinforced by shivering when it's ignored. As you settle back down, you listen to the wind test your defences. It whistles softly at first, then dulls as cloth and wood slow it. The room still cools, but more slowly now. That matters. Every slowed degree is a small victory. This is winter strategy at its most basic. Don't create heat if you can't. Just stop losing it so fast. You close your eyes again, surrounded by rags, wool, bodies and barriers, hoping your makeshift walls will hold until morning. The idea of a window is generous. What you have is a hole in the wall that sometimes lets light in and often lets winter in with it. During the day, it's your connection to the outside world. At night, it's a liability you have to manage carefully. Glass exists, but not for you. It's expensive, fragile, and reserved for churches, monasteries, and the very wealthy. For most poor medieval households, windows are covered with wooden shutters, cloth, or stretched animal parchment. None of these seal well. All of them leak cold. Here's a clear historical fact. Glass windows did not become common in ordinary European homes until well after the Middle Ages. Even when glass was present, it was often limited to small panes set in lead, and many households removed them in winter to reduce heat loss. You close the shutters as soon as the light fades. Leaving them open at night is unthinkable. Cold radiates in from the darkness beyond, and wind finds every flaw in the wood. You hang cloth over the opening if you can, doubling layers the way you do with clothing. Here's quirky detail. Some people used oiled cloth or oiled parchment to cover windows, letting in a dim glow while blocking drafts. It worked, sort of. The light was weak and yellow, and the material stiffened in cold, but it was better than nothing. At night, the window area is the coldest part of the room. Frost forms there first. You avoid sleeping nearby unless the room is crowded and space is tight. Even then, you angle your body so the coldest air hits your back, not your face. There's a scholarly debate about how much light medieval people actually wanted in winter. Some argue darker interiors conserved heat and reduced drafts. Others suggest people preferred more light despite the cold. In practice, winter nights answer the question for you. Darkness is cheaper than warmth. You listen as wind rattles the shutters, Each gust presses cold air through tiny gaps. You adjust cloth coverings when you can, but eventually you stop fighting every sound. The cold is persistent. You manage it, not eliminate it. Children are warned not to touch window coverings at night. Pulling them loose invites a rush of cold air. Elders reinforce this rule sharply. A single careless movement can drop the room's temperature noticeably. As sleep deepens, the window fades from your awareness. It's still there, leaking cold slowly, but your layers and positioning blunt its effect. The worst nights are when storms blow directly against it. Then you wake more often, adjusting, blocking, enduring. Morning will bring pale light through the covering, enough to tell you it's time to rise. For now, the window remains sealed as best it can be, a thin, imperfect barrier between you and a frozen world. When the cold feels especially cruel, you turn to tricks. Small, clever interventions that don't rely on burning precious fuel all night. These aren't comforts, they're tactics, passed down quietly from one winter to the next. Hot stones are one of them. Before the fire dies, you place smooth stones near the embers. Not too close, cracked stones can explode when heated, but close enough to absorb warmth. Once the fire fades, you wrap the stones in cloth and tuck them near your feet or between bodies. They radiate heat slowly, steadily, buying you a few extra hours of comfort. Here's a historical fact supported by later medieval references. Heated stones and bricks were commonly used as bed warmers across Europe, especially among those who couldn't afford metal warming pans. The practice predates the medieval period and persists in rural areas for centuries. You have to be careful. Stones too hot will burn skin. Stones too cool do nothing. Experience teaches you the balance. Children aren't trusted with this task. Elders supervise, remembering accidents from winters past. Here's the quirky part. Some people believed certain stones held heat better because of their nature. River stones were favoured. Stones from churches were sometimes thought especially effective, though taking them wasn't exactly encouraged. The belief mattered less than the result. Warmth, where it counted. Another trick involves ash. Warm ash, packed into cloth, holds heat longer than you'd expect. It's messy and smells faintly of fire, but it works. You keep it away from your face and bedding, tucking it low, near feet or the small of the back. There's debate among historians about how widespread these practices were among the poorest. Some argue they were common knowledge, others suggest they were used only when fuel was briefly abundant. Lying here with a warm stone near your toes, you suspect people used every trick they could when winter pressed hard enough. You also adjust what you eat before sleep. Heavier meals in the evening if food allows. Porridge thickened with fat, red dipped in broth. Digesting food generates heat, and medieval people understood this intuitively. Going to bed hungry in winter is dangerous. As the night deepens, the stone cools. You feel the moment it stops helping, but by then your body is settled. The worst of the chill delayed long enough for sleep to take hold. These tricks don't defeat winter. They blunt it. They shave off the sharpest edge, turning a dangerous night into a merely miserable one. And in medieval winter, that's success. Even sleep begins at the table. What you eat, or don't, decides how the night will feel long before you lie down. In winter, food isn't just nourishment. It's fuel. Burn it too early and you shiver. Burn it slowly through the night and you stand a chance. You eat heavier in the evening when you can. Thick porridge made from barley or oats. Bread dense enough to weigh in your hand. If you're lucky, bit of fat, lard, dripping or cheese, stirred in for richness. Fat burns slow and warm. You don't know the chemistry, but you know the effect. Here's a historical fact rooted in medieval dietary theory. Winter diets emphasized warming foods, believed to counter cold and wet humours. Grains, fats and cooked foods were favoured at night, while raw foods were avoided. This aligns surprisingly well with modern metabolic understanding. You eat before the fire dies completely, letting the warmth and digestion overlap. A warm stomach feels safer. Children are encouraged to eat even when they say they're tired. Elders too. Skipping a winter meal isn't seen as virtuous, it's risky. Here's a quirky medieval belief. Going to bed with a full stomach was sometimes discouraged in other seasons, but winter made exception. Cold changed the rules. What might cause discomfort in summer could save you in January. You'd drink something warm if possible. Thin ale, small beer, or broth. Water is cold and suspect. Warm liquid spreads heat quickly even if it fades fast. Alcohol myths already circulate. People say drink warms you. You've noticed the truth is more complicated, a little. Helps you relax, too much makes you colder later. There's a scholarly debate here as well. Did medieval people understand the dangers of alcohol in cold? Some sources warn against excess in winter, noting it opens the body to chill. Others praise it for courage and warmth. Experience teaches moderation. As you settle down, digestion begins its slow work. You feel it, a gentle warmth in your core spreading outward. It doesn't last forever, but it carries you into the first part of sleep when cold feels most aggressive. Hunger wakes you faster than cold. You've learned that. An empty belly means your body has nothing to burn. So you eat when you can, even if food is monotonous and scarce. This is another quiet calculation of winter life. Rationing food across weeks while still eating enough to survive nights. Eat too much now, starve later. Eat too little, freeze sooner. There's no easy balance. Tonight you've eaten just enough. Your stomach is heavy but calm. Your body has fuel. As you curl under woolen cloth, digestion hums softly inside you, working through the night like a small internal fire. There's a rumour that drink keeps you warm. You've heard it all your life. On cold nights, someone always suggests a little extra ale before bed. A swallow of something stronger if it's available. The idea is comforting. Liquid fear against winter's bite. The truth is complicated. You drink what you have. Small beer is common, weak enough to hydrate without overwhelming. Stronger ale appears on special occasions, sometimes shared to lift spirits, when the cold feels endless. You feel the warmth as it goes down, spreading through your chest. Here's a historical fact. Alcohol was widely consumed in medieval Europe, not just for pleasure, but because brewing made water safer to drink. Even children drank small beer. But strong alcohol was less common among the poor and often rationed carefully. The warmth from alcohol is immediate and misleading. It relaxes blood vessels near the skin, making you feel warmer while actually increasing heat loss. You don't know the physiology, but you know the outcome. Drink too much and you wake colder than before. Here's the quirky part. Medieval medical texts sometimes warned against alcohol in extreme cold, claiming it opened the pores and let cold invade the body. That phrasing is surprisingly accurate, even if the explanation isn't modern. So you're careful. A sip, not a cup. Enough to calm nerves and ease muscles stiff from cold, not enough to dull awareness. Winter sleep requires attention. You can't afford to pass out deeply if fire or animals need tending. There's debate among historians about how often poor medieval people actually drank to excess. Some argue alcohol abuse was common. Others suggest scarcity and labour demands limited it. Lying here, sipping cautiously, you suspect excess was more rumour than routine. You feel that the gentle relaxation settle in. Muscles loosen. The itch fades. Sleep comes a little easier. But you stop before warmth turns to flush. You've learned that line the hard way. Alcohol isn't heat. It's mood. Use carefully, it makes winter tolerable. Use poorly, it makes it dangerous. As you set the cup aside, the room feels no warmer, but you feel steadier. Sometimes that's enough. Winter doesn't just change how you sleep, it changes when you sleep. Time stretches differently when nights are long and daylight is scarce, and your body adapts whether you plan it or not. You don't sleep in one long, uninterrupted block. Few people do. Instead, sleep comes in segments. A first sleep deep and heavy, followed by waking in the middle of the night. Then a second sleep, lighter, shorter, carrying you to morning. Here's a well-established historical fact. Many medieval sources reference segmented sleep, sometimes called first sleep and second sleep. This pattern was common across Europe and persisted into the early modern period, especially in winter. You wake in the dark, fire long gone, room cold but familiar. This waking isn't alarming, it's expected. You might shift position, adjust blankets, check the animals, or speak quietly with someone else who's awake. Sometimes you pray, sometimes you just lie there listening. Here's the quirky part. Some medieval people believed this middle waking was the best time for thinking, dreaming, or spiritual reflection. Minds were said to be clearest then, balanced between rest and wakefulness. It's hard to say how romantic that belief was, but the habit was real. You don't get up fully. Moving too much loses heat. Instead, you tuck, retuck, and settle again. The break lets you manage discomfort before it builds too far. In a way, segmented sleep makes winter nights more tolerable. There's scholarly debate about whether segmented sleep was biological or cultural. Did people naturally sleep this way without artificial light? Or was it shaped by labour patterns and winter darkness? The answer is likely both. Lying here, half awake, it feels natural enough. As the second sleep approaches, your body cools again. Core temperature drops. You pull the blanket tighter, curl deeper, and drift back under. Dreams are lighter now, less vivid, but rest continues. Morning arrives slowly. Pale light seeps through the window coverings. Someone stirs. The day begins not with an alarm, but with necessity. This rhythm, sleep-wake, sleep, fits winter. It gives you chances to adjust, to survive the long cold hours without demanding uninterrupted comfort. It's another quiet adaptation shaped by darkness, cold, and human endurance. Cold is never just uncomfortable. In your world, it's dangerous, morally charged, and medically suspicious. You don't think of winter illness as random bad luck. You think of it as something invited in through chills, drafts, dampness, or carelessness. You wake sometimes with a tight chest or a wet cough, and your first thought isn't infection, it's exposure. Somewhere, somehow, the cold got inside you. Here's a historical fact grounded in medieval medical theory. Illness was commonly explained through the imbalance of the four humours, and winter was believed to increase cold and wet humours, especially phlegm. Symptoms like coughing, lethargy, and joint pain were all blamed on excessive cold entering the body. So you guard against chill obsessively. You avoid sitting on bare ground, you dry clothes as best you can, you cover your head and neck even indoors. Going to sleep damp is considered especially dangerous. Many people believe it's a direct path to sickness. There's a quiet fear that runs through winter nights. Not panic, but vigilance. You listen to breathing around you. A cough that lingers too long draws attention. An elder shivering uncontrollably triggers concern. Cold can push weak body past its limit without warning. Here's the quirky part. Medieval people sometimes believed sudden warmth after cold was just as dangerous as the cold itself. Warming too fast could shock the body, so fires are approached cautiously. You warm gradually, rotating near the hearth instead of rushing in. Scholars still debate how much of medieval winter illness was caused directly by cold exposure versus malnutrition and crowding. Modern medicine points to weakened immune systems and respiratory infections. Medieval people experienced it as a failure of balance, inside and out. You do what you can. You share warmth. You share food when possible. You keep the sick in the warmest part of the room, even if that means others move to colder spots. Survival becomes collective again. As you settle into sleep, you take stock unconsciously. Breathing steady, limbs warm enough, heads are covered, no damp against skin. These checks matter more than comfort. They're the line between rest and risk. Winter doesn't kill loudly, it works quietly, through small losses and overlooked details. So you watch those details closely night after night, hoping to wake without cough, without ache, without the sense that cold has finally won a little too much ground. Cold isn't just a physical trial, it's moral. At least that's how you're taught to see it. Winter suffering isn't random, it's meaningful. Enduring it without complaint is a virtue, a test of character, and sometimes a form of devotion. The church has a lot to say about this. You hear sermons reminding you that hardship purifies the soul, that cold teaches humility, that Christ was born into winter poverty, exposed to the elements. These ideas don't make the night warmer, but they frame it. They give discomfort a narrative. Here's a historical fact reflected in medieval sermons and writings. Christian teachings often encouraged acceptance of physical hardship, including cold, as spiritually beneficial. Complaining too much about discomfort could be seen as weakness or ingratitude. This doesn't mean warmth is sinful. Churches themselves are cold, drafty places, but there are also where you see the best wool cloaks and thickest fabrics. The message isn't suffer needlessly, but endure what you must. Here's the quirky part. Some medieval saints were said to embrace cold deliberately, sleeping on bare stone or refusing extra coverings. Their stories circulate in winter, held up as examples. You listen, half inspired, half skeptical. Holiness is easier to admire than to imitate when your feet are numb. There's debate among historians about how deeply these teachings shaped everyday behaviour. Some argue they encouraged resignation and acceptance. Others suggest people pragmatically sought warmth regardless of sermons. Lying here, blocking drafts and layering wool, you suspect survival usually wins over ideology. Still, the ideas linger. When you shiver, you remind yourself others have endured worse. When you give up a warmer spot to a child or elder, it feels right, not just practical. Cold becomes something shared morally and physically. Prayer sometimes fills the long middle waking of the night. Soft words in the dark, familiar rhythms. They don't heat the room, but they calm the mind. Anxiety makes cold sharper. Calm dulls it slightly. As sleep returns, you frame endurance as success. You haven't conquered winter. You've cooperated with it just enough to last another night. Winter isn't the same everywhere. You might assume cold is cold, but geography changes everything. Where you live decides how you fight it, how long it lasts, and how desperate nights become. In the north, Scandinavia, the British Isles, parts of the Holy Roman Empire, winter is long, dark, and relentless. Snow piles up and stays. Daylight shrinks to a thin band near the horizon. Here, people build low and tight. Roofs are steep. Walls are thick. Longhouses dominate not by accident, but because they trap heat better over months of cold. Here's a historical fact. Archaeological evidence shows that northern medieval homes often prioritise compact designs with shared human-animal space, specifically to conserve heat through extended winters. This wasn't tradition alone, it was environmental necessity. Further south, winters are shorter but still harsh. Cold rains soak everything. Dampness becomes the enemy instead of snow. Stone houses are more common, and while they stay cool in summer, they're brutal in winter. You shiver differently here. Not sharp cold, but a deep, clammy chill that never fully leaves. Here's the quirky part. People in colder northern regions sometimes slept better in winter than those further south. Dry cold is easier to manage than wet cold. Wool works better. Straw stays drier. In damp regions, everything feels colder because moisture steals heat faster than air ever could. Diet changes with region too. In colder climates, fat is prized. Fish oil, butter, animal sea fat. Further south, diets rely more on grains and olive oil, which doesn't provide the same slow-burning warmth. These differences shape how nights feel, how long bodies hold heat. There's scholarly debate about which regions suffered most in winter. Some historians argue northern populations were better adapted culturally and biologically. Others point to higher mortality in extreme cold years, regardless of region. The truth shifts year by year, winter by winter. You hear stories from travellers, how people sleep elsewhere, underground homes, turf walls, thick felt coverings. Everyone thinks their way is the sensible one. Everyone thinks others are either reckless or miserable. Wherever you are, the principle is the same: adapt or suffer. Architecture, clothing, food and sleep habits bend around winter's demands. No region escapes. They just negotiate differently. As you drift off again, you realise something quietly unsettling. None of this feels temporary. Winter isn't an interruption to life. It is life for months at a time, and how well you sleep during it decides how well you live through it. Some winters break the rules. You feel it early before anyone says it out loud. The cold arrives sooner than expected. It lingers longer. Snow falls heavy and wet, then freezes solid. The usual tricks, extra straw, closer sleeping, careful rationing, suddenly feel thin. These are the winters people remember by name long after they end. Here's a historical fact recorded in chronicles and manorial records. Medieval Europe experienced periodic extreme winters, often linked to wider climatic shifts like the early phases of the Little Ice Age. These winters brought crop failure, frozen rivers, and widespread hardship that overwhelmed even practiced survival strategies. During these years, sleep becomes lighter, more anxious. You wake more often, not just from cold, but from hunger. Food stores shrink fast when fields fail. Bread grows thinner. Porridge stretches with water instead of grain. Digestion no longer provides the warmth it once did. Here's the quirky part. People sometimes blamed extreme winters on moral failure or divine displeasure. Too much sin, not enough prayer. The weather itself became a message. Whether anyone truly believed this didn't matter much, the fear added another layer of stress to already restless nights. Animals suffer too. Livestock weaken, produce less heat, and sometimes die. When that happens, the house grows colder in ways you can't fully compensate for. Losing an animal in winter isn't just economic loss, it's thermal loss. There's a scholarly debate about whether famine or cold killed more people during these extreme winters. Many historians argue it was the combination that proved fatal. Cold weakened bodies, hunger finished the work, sleep shallow and interrupted could no longer restore what the day took away. You ration firewood harder, fires go out earlier, hot stones are reused until they're barely warm. Blankets are mended endlessly, growing heavier and more threadbare at the same time. You sleep closer together than ever, tension rising as space disappears. Children cry more at night, elders grow quiet, everyone listens to the wind, measuring it against memory. Was it always this loud, this colder? The answer doesn't matter. Tonight still has to be survived. These winters pass eventually, they always do. But not everyone passes with them. Sleep during these times isn't rest. It's suspension. A fragile pause between one cold dawn and the next, hoping the world softens before your body gives up. Winter is hardest on the ones who can't fight it back. You see it clearly when you look around the sleeping space. The smallest bodies curl tight. The oldest barely move at all. Cold doesn't treat everyone equally, and neither does survival. Children lose heat fast. Their bodies are small, their reserves limited. At night, they're placed at the centre of the group, wrapped in extra layers, tucked between adults. Someone always checks them during the night, hand resting briefly on a back or belly, feeling for warmth. Here's a historical fact drawn from mortality records and household accounts. Infant and child mortality spiked during harsh winters in medieval Europe. Cold exposure combined with malnutrition made survival especially difficult for the young. Elders face the opposite problem. Their bodies don't generate heat efficiently anymore. Circulation weakens, joints ache, they sleep lighter, wake more often, and struggle to re-warm once chilled. You give them the warmest spots, closest to the hearth or animals. Here's the quirky part. Elders were sometimes believed to carry cold inside them. Their chill was thought contagious in a humoral sense, not literal. This belief didn't isolate them, but it shaped how people thought about age and warmth. There's scholarly debate about how families prioritised care when resources were thin. Some argue harsh choices were made. Others point to strong communal bonds. Lying here, adjusting blankets to cover a child's feet, you know the truth varied household by household. When someone grows too weak, sleep becomes dangerous. They stop shivering. That's the sign people fear most. You try to wake them, feed them, warm them slowly. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. These moments define winter more than cold itself. The quiet vigilance, the constant checking, the knowledge that sleep can tip from rest into risk without warning. As the night stretches on, you keep one part of yourself half awake, listening, feeling, ready to respond. This isn't anxiety, it's responsibility. Survival here is shared, and so is the watch. People like to imagine that medieval folk were tougher than you, hardier, less bothered. By cold, somehow built differently. You hear that idea even now whispered through time, that they simply shrugged off winters that would paralyse you. Lying here, you're not so sure. You endure, yes, but endurance isn't the same as comfort. You're not immune to cold, you're practiced in surviving it. That distinction matters. Here's a historical fact that complicates the myth. Skeletal evidence from medieval populations shows signs of chronic stress. Arthritis, joint degeneration, and healed fractures, suggesting lives marked by physical strain and environmental hardship rather than effortless resilience. The idea of medieval hardiness is debated fiercely among historians. Some argue lifelong exposure conditioned bodies to tolerate cold better. Others say people suffered constantly with limited alternatives. The truth likely sits somewhere in between. Adaptation, not immunity. Here's the quirky part. Medieval literature sometimes mocks characters who complain about cold too much, painting them as soft or foolish. This doesn't mean people didn't feel cold, it means complaining was socially discouraged. Silence became a survival skill. You don't complain, not because you don't hurt, but because complaining changes nothing and wastes energy. You focus on what you can adjust. Layers, position, breath. That focus can look like toughness from the outside. As you settle deeper, you realise how much of survival is mental. Accepting discomfort reduces panic. Panic sharpens cold, calm blunts it. This is something you've learned through repetition, not philosophy. So, were medieval people tougher? Or just trapped in systems that demanded endurance? As sleep takes you, the question lingers unanswered, wrapped in wool and habit. By the end of winter, sleep has changed you. Not dramatically, quietly. You don't notice it happening night by night, but lying here now, you feel it in the way your body settles faster, in the way cold no longer surprises you. It announces itself, and you answer automatically. You know where to lie without thinking. You know how to curl, how to tuck cloth, how to borrow warmth without waking anyone. Your hands move in the dark with practiced certainty, sealing drafts, pulling blankets, adjusting straw. Sleep has become a skill. Here's a historical fact that feels almost invisible because it worked so well. Medieval survival depended less on grand innovations and more on accumulated habits. Small actions, repeated nightly, made the difference between enduring winter and being broken by it. You lie down knowing exactly how cold it will get. You know when the fire will fade, when the animals will settle, when the room will reach its lowest temperature, usually just before dawn. That knowledge removes some of the fear. Anticipation is easier than surprise. Here's the quirky part. People sometimes said, winter taught patience better than any sermon. Long nights forced stillness, forced attention, forced endurance. Sleep wasn't escape, it was training. There's one last scholarly debate that hangs over all of this. Did winter sleep shorten medieval lives through chronic stress and poor rest? Or did adaptation allow people to function surprisingly well under conditions we'd find unbearable? The evidence points both ways. Mortality was high, but life went on, generation after generation. As you settle into what will be another shallow, shared, smoky night, you feel something close to acceptance. Not happiness, not comfort, but familiarity. Winter has rules. You've learned them. Your breath slows. The cold presses in. Wool holds. Bodies share warmth. Somewhere in the dark, an animal shifts, adding just a little more heat to the room. Sleep comes, not as luxury, but as survival's quiet reward. And in this moment, wrapped in frost and history, you do what countless others have done before you. You endure the night. The long winter finally loosens its grip. Not all at once, but enough. Enough that nights grow shorter. Enough that the fire lasts a little longer. Enough that straw can be changed, clothes aired, bodies rest more deeply. You let that thought carry you down gently. You're still here. You made it through.